Hello，大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博人。Now, I've lived here in China for nearly 10 years now, so I have to say I'm pretty used to life here already. But there were still some culture shocks that it took me a little while to understand, from not saying thank you to drinking hot water to absolutely under no circumstances putting your clothes on the floor, even in your own home. Today, we'll chat with friend of the show, Eric Zhong, about my 5 China culture shocks. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Borum here in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. So we have friend of the show here, Eric Zhong. First, I'm going to introduce each of my 5 culture shocks, and then we'll see what he has to say. Eric, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
The first one, which I'm sure you'll agree with, is drinking hot water. Now, Chinese people love to drink hot water. In fact, they swear by it. There are a number of reasons, one of the main ones being the idea that drinking warm water somehow aids digestion and cold water can slow the stomach down. It's also said to help blood flow and control appetite and help you recover speedily when you're sick. In fact, often people's only advice when you're feeling down will be to drink plenty of hot water. 多喝热水. Eric, what is up with Chinese people and hot water?
Well, I would like to first make a more nuanced factual statement there. I think there are 2 types of water we are referring to here. Both are quite exotic, I would say, to some foreigners. The first one is hot water, like you said. The other one is more consumed by Chinese people, is warm water, which is something I personally would prefer. Because what's hot water, right? Is it something that's over 60 Celsius degrees, perhaps, for making tea and stuff like that? So yeah, perhaps to some extent, it's stereotypically correct that people in China here consume a lot of tea and they make it with really hot water. I mean, boiling water sometimes as well. But for warm water, it is more to say 多喝热水. It's more like 多喝温水. So a bit warmer than just lukewarm. Yes, it's supposed to be very good for your health, good for your metabolism, digestion, and just simply, starts your circulation, especially at the very beginning of the day. So personally, yeah, I do drink warm water much more often than the cold, icy water that you can see pretty much everywhere else in Western countries.
Yeah, and I've changed as well. So now, like when I first arrived, I couldn't understand it. And now I really like drinking hot water. So for me personally, I will use boiling water and then add just a little bit of cold water. But I have to add as well that boiling water first is a necessity here in China because obviously you can't drink the tap water. So when I grew up, obviously I would just turn on the tap and drink the water, which was always cold. But here it's a bit different. Do you drink bottled water or do you prefer to use a filter or what?
Well, I do that in different cities very differently. In some cities where the water quality is supreme, you can simply just get it quickly filtered or simply to boil it, and it tastes wonderful. But in some cities, perhaps you need to seriously filter it. Otherwise, the tap water would smell or taste kind of funny. And another thing that some people would trace the origin of drinking boiling or hot water to would be the so-called germ warfare that was launched by the militant Imperial Japan back in the Second World War here in China. So, a lot of the habits we're used to nowadays are partly shaped by the social norms, by the collective memory we've had. So yeah, some people still think that boiling water is safer because then it would sort of disinfect the water, eliminate the germs inside, and people are then just more used to drinking it.
As I said before, I really love it. So I think I'm more Chinese than a lot of people at the moment when it comes to drinking hot water. Let's move on to the next one. This one's quite interesting. It's the idea that the floor is dirty even in your own home. So back home in New Zealand, I had no qualms with getting undressed and just dropping my clothes on the floor or chucking my blankets on the ground when I'm changing my bed sheets. But now, having lived in China for a few years, that idea seems unfathomable. For Chinese people, the floor is considered quite filthy, even in your own home. And most won't even place their bag on the ground. Now, where does this come from, Eric?
I mean, I really don't know because I was also quite shocked when I say first visited the United States, when I first visited Europe. I would see people just sitting on the ground anywhere when they want, or put everything everywhere, especially on the floor. So that's something that shocked me a little bit. And especially you can simply wear the shoes that you wear outside in your house. And even some people would not even take off their shoes when they get on their bed. So that's something that was quite shocking to me as well. I mean, one explanation for that perhaps is if you come to China, you would see how densely populated it is. So indeed, perhaps if you travel outside of your home and you would bring, say, more dirt or germs back on your shoes, on your bags, and people are just more aware of the hygienic problems and do not want things to cross-infect each other. And perhaps that's where this habit comes from.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned shoes and clothing as well, because I've also changed in that regard. In New Zealand, I wouldn't necessarily take my shoes off when I got home, but now in China, I feel like if I don't take my shoes off, it's really quite disgusting. It's actually ingrained into my thinking. Also, clothing, when I'm outside, when I come home, I have to change my clothes straight away, and especially not lie down on my bed with clothes I wore outside. So that's probably all part of the same thing, do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because especially after COVID, people now attach a lot more attention to sanitizing their hands when they go back home, not touching their eyes and faces. Well, it's a good thing for your health generally, right?
Yeah, it's a good habit to get into, probably. But it is weird when I go home to New Zealand because, I'll literally change my bed and leave the blankets up. Or if I'm taking my clothes off or putting clothes away, I definitely won't put them on the floor. And some people back home will be like, it's kind of weird. But anyway, I think it's good. Like you say, it's a good habit. Number 3, let's move on. This is kind of a cute one, and one you'll notice if you come to China, if you haven't been here for very long. It is guys holding their girlfriends' or wives' handbags. Now, this is one of the cuter culture shocks that I discovered the first time I visited China, and one that still makes me smile today. If you go anywhere where people are, it won't be long until you come across a guy carrying a girly handbag. You won't need to look too far to find his girlfriend or wife nearby, usually with absolutely nothing in her hands. I think it comes down to the fact that men in China don't seem to suffer from the same debilitating masculinity issues many in Western countries do, where a woman's handbag would be considered 150% off limits. I asked a couple of girlfriends about it, and they were surprised that I even thought it was a thing, telling me that it's just something their guy needs to do. Some even said it's a way of showing that a guy is taken. Were you surprised to know that this was a thing as well for foreigners, Eric?
Well, yes, truthfully, yes. I mean, before you mentioned it, I was not very much aware of how this might appear weird to some outsiders. I guess it's just because I am in this very cultural atmosphere. I'm used to it on a daily basis, so I didn't really notice that it could be something done in a very different way. I mean, even when I was a boy, when I was a kid, my father would just tell me to share the burden of my mom, especially when we travel together outside or even when we do family shopping. He would just tell me to say, all right, you're a big boy now. Perhaps you also have some strength to share, right? So carry your mom's handbag or a lot of the grocery bags. It's part of the responsibilities, right?
Yeah, the interesting thing is in the West, in New Zealand particularly, it's kind of like a man and a handbag is like two opposite poles of a magnet. For example, my brother, he'll be walking with his wife, and if she needs something out of her handbag or she needs him to hold it for a second, he absolutely would refuse. If she's like, grab my handbag and take something out for me, he wouldn't be seen dead holding her handbag. So I think it's quite a strong feeling in the West. Okay, let's move on to number 4. People calling you handsome or pretty probably is not a come on. When I first started learning Chinese, I found it quite interesting and sometimes confusing how people would randomly address me as 帅哥 or handsome guy. One time I was at a bar in Changsha in Hunan province, and a guy came up and asked me to join him for a drink. I thought I'd better, and he kept telling me you're so handsome, probably about 50 times. Now, I was sure he had something else in mind until he started showing me pictures of his girlfriend. People will also address random women on the streets as menu or pretty girl without any ulterior motive. If you did that in the West, you might be accused of sexual harassment. Getting used to this culture shock quickly is quite useful and will save you from some embarrassing situations. What's up with that, Eric?
Well, I guess it's just a very friendly and polite way for Chinese people to address strangers, especially when we do not want to appear so, official, and we do not want things to be very awkward. It could be a really easy catchphrase to start a conversation. So yeah, I think it's just something that's expressed out of politeness and the willingness to want to start a conversation with another person.
Yeah, I think it's important. It kind of softens an interaction with a stranger. For example, this is another one that's changed me being here in China. If I'm, for example, biking along and there's a guy in front taking up the whole road, I'll say, 帅哥让一下, handsome guy, let me through, sort of thing. If you said that in New Zealand, you might get a very different response. So yeah, I think it is definitely about being polite.
Yeah, exactly. Soften things up. And especially when there could be a type of request you would like to ask for, even some type of suggestions you would like to give to others. That type of starting point would just simply let the other person develop a more positive relationship with you.
Yeah, but there is one aspect of it that's still kind of awkward for me. A lot of the time, if somebody's trying to get your attention, like in a shop or something, they might shout out, 帅哥, handsome guy. And
a lot of people would turn around their head.
Yeah, that's the thing. I hear it, but I don't want to appear like 太多, so I don't want to be cocky. So I just don't look, because if someone shouts out handsome guy and you suddenly, it's kind of like you're saying you're really hot or something. So how do you get around that?
Oh, well, it's a very tactful thing to do. You just have to wait a half a second or a second to perhaps glance about to see what's going on, if that person is addressing you, and if that person is indeed calling out to you, then accept that pleasantry. But if you see that other people are reacting to it, then because you simply use your glances to take a grasp of what was going on, then you should feel not embarrassed at all, right?
Definitely something that takes a little understanding. Okay, last culture shock, and that is, don't say thank you. Now, that seems so rude, not thanking friends or waiters or taxi drivers. But in China, you soon realize, especially if you have local friends, that saying thank you is not only often unnecessary, but it can sometimes be offensive to people. Some Chinese people believe that saying thank you places a distance between friends and family. It's as though their help is already expected by default by way of the relationship and an obligation. So saying thanks then can place a distance in the middle and suggests to them that you don't really see them as particularly close. Somehow this has extended into the service sector as well to a certain degree. So it's also necessary to try not to think of staff as rude when you buy something and they don't reply with a thank you. Now, I've slowly got used to it, but still, I often find myself saying thank you every time, for example, a waiter brings a dish to my table. And if I'm with Chinese friends, they kind of find it a little bit awkward and they're like, you probably only need to say thank you once. But in my culture, we say thank you so often that it feels weird if they put something down and I don't thank them. How do we get through that one, Eric?
Well, I would like to also offer a more nuanced perspective. China is definitely not a thank you free zone. I say thank you very much as well in my daily life. But indeed, perhaps under some special circumstances and in some situations, we don't really say thank you that much. So, for example, among really, say, close family members, we don't say thank you that much. That's one thing I have observed and personally experienced. And like among really, really close friends, perhaps you don't say thank you that much either. Like you said, it's even perhaps putting a distance between really close friends. But for example, like you said, If we go to a shop, we would thank the people who have provided services. If we get deliveries, right, I would also say thank you, even if sometimes the service was not even that good. And I was indeed quite shocked when I went to a Starbucks in the United States for the first time. I would see they spend so much time actually having a conversation with the clients, even if the line was super long already, and they were like extremely friendly and saying thank yous all the time to whoever that was passing by.
Yeah, that's very true. I often find when I head back to New Zealand, I find it quite alarming how friendly they can be in the service sector. Quite often they'll ask you how your day's been, thank you profusely for coming in. It can feel quite invasive after having lived in China for 10 years. So I guess that is why it's a culture shock. As you said before, it comes down to, background history, understanding and beliefs from a different place. Eric, thank you so much. It was awesome to chat with you today about these culture shocks. And I want you guys to let me know if you liked this video. We can maybe do another one. Let me know what you think down below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.